and welcome to this Voices of Strength video series. And I am thrilled that it's finally coming together. It's taken a while, but here we are interviewing all the voices of strength within the book. And today we have the wonderful Dennis Pitocco. I don't know if hopefully I've pronounced your surname correctly.
Close enough.
Close enough. Okay, I'm sure you can rectify that and make sure I get it correct. So, welcome, Dennis. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for inviting me to talk about your amazing anthology, for lack of a better term, and my opportunity to add a story.
Oh, wonderful. And that's what it's about. It's about storytelling. It's about telling stories of our achievements, our challenges, things that get in the way, things we've overcome. But Voices of Strength has come from a slightly different view because, you know, Dennis, like you, we're fortunate. We speak to lots of people in the work that we do. And I've been working with a lot of men recently in the last 18 months, 2 years in particular. And it came to me that men are changing. And I'm not talking about the new generation. I'm talking about us baby boomers and, you know, is it Gen Z or whatever you call them, Gen X? I've lost where we are with all these different terminologies for the different generations. But what I found was that men seem to be waking up to the fact that, you know, they no longer wanted to follow the status quo. They had gone on that inner journey, the most adventurous journey that we can participate in our lives. Yep. And for me, they were forging new paths because I'd witnessed these transformations through working with people and writing and publishing their books. So in terms of your story and in terms of where you sit as a voice of strength of a man forging his own path, when did you first realize you had a voice that was different and need to be shared with other people?
Excellent question, Brenda. That's a tough one, but I remember what happened. And that was, you know, my background, just to give you a little story here, is I was raised in Pittsburgh. I'm one of 8 children, not a difficult childhood, but one where the economics were always a challenge. I left my home city of Pittsburgh when I was 17 years old, joined the Air Force. And that was frankly to get an education because there was no concept of college given the economics. And then I got into banking after I left the Air Force, and that was a job placement service. And this leads to a point in my life where I never grew up saying, I want to be a banker. I got placed in a job. It was a job. I needed a job. But then I decided once I got into banking, you know, I'm not bad at this. I'm just going to work hard. I don't have a formal education, so I'm going to have to work harder than everybody else. I'm happy to say, you know, 30 years later, I'd risen to the top ranks of banking across America. And then I decided I'm going to do something different. I was starting to develop my voice, my talent, my understanding of who I was and what I could do, even though I was in an occupation that I didn't necessarily say this was what I want to do for a living. It was a job. Anyhow, so I finally decided after many years, I'm going to go do something myself. And I left banking altogether, started a business in America, in Canada, in the UK, met my wife in the UK, sold everything. And this goes back now about 17 years ago.
Okay. And
came back here to Tampa with my wife and decided, Brenda, it's like one of those things, you know, you hear the old analogy about the dog chasing the car. Well, we caught the car. Then the question becomes, Brenda, what do you do with it? We were relatively successful in the sale of my businesses. We had an opportunity, or better yet, we were blessed with an opportunity to do what very few people have at a relatively young age, and that is to make choices. You know, what do we want to do with our time? What do we want to do with our voice? And after a lot of discussions, we decided that we were going to do three things. Number one, we were going to travel the world. Now, like you and me, we've traveled the world in business for years, but traveling on business, as you know, isn't the same. It's because I see the meeting room, I see the taxi, I see the airport, but I never really see the city.
Yeah.
And my wife was the same when she was in her own occupation. So we said, we're going to intentionally travel the world. That was part one. And we're going to go see parts of the world beyond America. And then when we get too old and crotchety, we'll come back and we'll discover America. So we started doing that. Second thing we said is we both have a real affinity for giving back. And when I say giving back, I don't mean just writing a check, Brenda. I mean rolling up the sleeves and getting involved. So we said we're going to make a serious commitment to the nonprofit sector here in Tampa. And we did that. We've been delivering meals. I've been serving on board. So we've been doing that for years. The third thing is all these people tell us, well, you got to keep your mind active when you're retired. We were young, but technically retired. So I said to my wife, I'm going to start a website. Now you're talking to a guy that has no technology background, has never built a website in his life. But I said, just starting from a blank sheet of paper, it's going to be a heck of a learning experience. And that's how I got into the media world and publishing. And frankly, that's where I found my voice. Because of the reaction to what we were doing and the writers that we met and people like you that we never would have encountered had we not done that. And that thing, which I can talk about later if you'd like, that thing has grown from what was going to be an interesting hobby into this giant award-winning thing with over almost 1,100 writers now. But none of that was interesting. None of that was planned. It was simply kind of working with your own intuition, your experience, your judgment, and frankly, as you do so often, I'm sure, Brenda, and that was just rolling the dice a little bit.
Exactly.
Yes. And there was a quote that I think I may put in my story to you, and I like it. It comes from Margaret Shepard, and it is sometimes the only available transportation is a leap of faith.
Yes.
And let me tell you, we have taken so many leaps of faith, but we've been lifted up by the voices that come back to us and say, you're doing the right thing. We like what you're doing. Keep it up. And yes, I do want to write an article for you. And the relationships have just been remarkable, but little did we know that was going to come out of it, a hobby.
Exactly. And, I think we should explore this a bit more because you and I, we're not in our 20s or 30s anymore, even although in our mind we are.
Right.
Right. But we've got wisdom, we've got insight, and that's what we've got to tap into. Now, let's take the discussion a bit further because like you, but unlike you, I always wanted to be a teacher since I was 6.
Yep.
I always seemed to work with underrepresented voices. So at 10, I raised money for Biafran children. What 10-year-old, very working class, no money, similar background as you, went out and raised a week's wages in 1967 for children that were miles away? Because in those days, it was a little box, it was black and white TV. So from a young age, I was always fascinated with underrepresentation. I didn't know that then, but looking back now, I've got hindsight, and I understand it. But, you go on this road. So I became a teacher not until I was in my 30s because I left school. I got married at 17, Dennis. You went off to the
Air Force.
I got married. Same kind of thing. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Before I knew it, I'm married. 4 years later, I've got a kid. 8 years later, I've got 4 kids. Do you know what I mean? But in between that, there was lots of things happening. But it's this whole thing, like, sometimes you think you know a path, or sometimes you're thrown down a path, like you went into the financial world and found that you had a panache for it. But what would you say to people who maybe aren't on that right path? Maybe they're in their 30s, maybe they're 40, but they've got a gut feeling, they've got a voice in their head. What would you say to people who are like at a crossroads or beginning to listen to their gut or intuition?
Oh, Oh my goodness, that's an easy one. Easier for me to say from a distance, but I'm also speaking from my own experience, and that is, take the risk, follow your head and your heart. Now, I know you still have to make a living, and so did I when I was in banking. But I started hearing that voice of I wanted to do something on my own. I worked for a lot of interesting people. Some were the worst possible bosses you could ever understand. Some were the best, and I learned from both. But what that gave me was the confidence that when I came to the edge of the cliff, I jumped off. And I urge people, it's wonderful if your heart and your head finally intersect, because I knew I had the business experience to do what I wanted to do. And I don't want to say it wasn't scary jumping off the cliff, but I also knew I knew enough good people and good relationships that if I needed some help, even if it's just somebody listening to me and saying, wow, I just started a business, and there were the people that were out there. So nurture your relationships, figure out who your real friends are, and take the leap, because the word, you hear this all the time. It's, you're then in your 70s. If only I would have started that business. If only I would have done that.
Exactly.
You're better off doing it and failing and learning from it than not doing it at all, because you don't want to be the guy or the gal with the regrets.
Absolutely. You don't want to be on your deathbed.
Exactly.
I hadn't done that. I wish I'd taken more chances,
Exactly.
You've got more or less the same quote as the one that I love. I love that quote. It's like, but what if I fall? And it says, but darling, what if you fly? And when I left teaching in 2016, so it's not that long ago, I never believed I would ever leave teaching. I didn't believe I would ever leave Scotland to live in England. And yet here I am in England, which was a massive leap for me. And then leaving education. Wow. But actually, it was the most freeing thing, liberating, let's use that word. It was the most liberating thing I did.
Wow.
Feel the fear and do it anyway. So yep. What would you say to people who are at the crossroads, who are ready to jump? I know you're going to tell them to jump, but what is it within them that you find that allows you to take that leap of faith?
Well, to be honest with you, my wife is one of them. I knew she had my back, if you know what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm, yes.
It wasn't like she was resisting and I'm going to go take a risk. I think from a family unit, you have to all be on board. Yeah. Because as you know, it's hard enough to do something new and different, if you want to call it a startup. But in the good times and the bad, I always knew she was right by my side. And boy, that was just priceless, because if we weren't aligned or synchronistic, number one, I probably wouldn't have done it, because I don't think that's fair, because it was our risk, not just my risk. Mm-hmm. So get your, as they say in America, get your ducks in order, which is your family, your friends, sit down and, understand the risk that you're taking. We didn't just decide one day, we thought about it. Mm-hmm. And I thought about it, and it was what I'll call a joint decision. And then came the adventure.
Yeah, and that's it in life, is one adventure. I talk about the author's adventure in my publishing business, and it is an adventure. So where was it a point in your life where you got to being vulnerable before you could build that resilience and develop that strength?
Oh, boy.
Was that for you?
I think that's when I was in banking, and I'll just have to give you a little story here. Early in my banking career, I was kind of new at it, and I was new at management. My background was high school in America and military training. The military training was helpful because it gave me a lot of discipline. But I remember early in my banking career, and I was kind of a young, up-and-coming, moving into management kind of guy. And I was working for an individual in a bank, and this bank was in, that was in Pittsburgh, of all places. And he was one of those characters that was known throughout banking circles across the country. He was an icon. And I was blessed because I was tucked under him and I was kind of being mentored by him. And this is when I mentioned earlier, I've been tucked under some of the best managers and some of the worst. Well, in the end, he was the worst. But let me define that, because that was a learning experience. And it was an opportunity for me to define myself, Brenda. And in this case, this gentleman, after working with him for a while, or working for him, and I was running a very big operation, I discovered that there were some inconsistencies in the books, as they say, the accounting.
Yeah.
In other words, the scorekeeping wasn't being kept properly. I brought it to him. I'm sorry, I discovered it. And it's one of those moments where you know that it's been going on for so long that I have two choices, Brenda. I can just go along with it, or I can take it up the ranks over his head and say, look, here's what I found. And that was a defining moment for me very early in my career, because there's that old adage, integrity is doing the right thing when no one else is watching.
Exactly.
I had to do the right thing. Now, I could have, it's so much easier. Again, I'm relatively young. I need the job. It's a nice bank. And I was facing termination if I handled it wrong. If I did nothing, everything would have been fine. But I said to my wife at the time, I said, look, I got to do the right thing here. So I went in over his head to the president of the bank and his friend who hired him and said, here's what I've got. Now, then I went home and that was a long night. The next morning I came in, I was called to a meeting he was there, his boss was there, everybody was in the room, the head of human resources was there. And I assumed I may have been ushered out of the bank. Well, it turned out that what they brought me into the room to tell me is that this gentleman has decided to retire to spend more time with his family.
Right.
And interestingly enough, I moved into that position. Now, that was such a turning point in my career. Now, let me say, when I say I learned from this gentleman, I did learn a lot, but I also learned what not to do. And I used that experience because I cannot tell you, Brenda, how many times since then I've been in circumstances personally, professionally, where I had to use that same definition again. Do I just stay quiet? And I've always learned, speak up, use that voice, because I do believe that good karma will come back to you, much the same way bad karma will come full circle.
Exactly.
And that has been just a remarkable pivot in my life.
I love that. And, and that's one of my, we've all got our stock phrases. And because I'm a person driven by integrity, it's who are you when no one is looking? So what you see is what you get.
Amen.
But you talk about walk your talk. That's what I say. Be raw and real. Be authentic. There's
Yes.
no point. If I make a mistake, I'm like that. I'm really sorry. If I'm late with something, I'm really sorry that it's going to be late. I will apologize, because to me that's strength of character, to be able to say you're wrong. And I remember as a teacher, sometimes I would say something, or a kid would do something, and I would be in the wrong. And I would turn around to that kid almost immediately and go, I'm really sorry. Miss Dempsey got that wrong there. Or Mrs. Bacon, or whatever my name was at the time, Miss Dempsey got that wrong there. I apologise. I'm sorry for that. And these kids would look at me as if I had horns, because they were not used to adults.
Ooh.
Sorry. Because they were used to be put down or not listened to. Whereas I was always encouraging voice, always encouraging to be listened to. It's so important. Which brings me on to a question leading on from that then, Dennis, and that is, what are 3 of the main traits of someone who's been on that inner journey and found that voice of strength? What is it they live by, and is there non-negotiables?
Oh, wow. Well, we've already touched upon non-negotiable means just always doing the right thing. Now, it's as I say that, there are so many people over the years I've said that to, and they kind of said, well, how will you know what the right thing is? And I said, unless you're a child of 5 or 6 years old, even at that age, you probably know what's right or wrong. But as you become an adult, don't tell me you don't know what the right thing is. You know what it is. So you got to have a compass. And I guess in my case, that was the compass. And so always doing the right thing. And as I said earlier, even if no one's watching, and boy, has that guided me. So that, I mean, that's one thing that's non-negotiable. And that's driven me so much. I'm not sure I've ever thought about the two others other than just, there's a quote out there that I gravitate towards a lot of quotes because there's so many people that can say things better than I can.
I know that. I know that.
There's one that I've followed for years, and it's by Carl Jung. And it is the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. And, if you and I were talking 30 years ago, you'd be talking to a different person.
Exactly.
Because I feel like I needed all the successes, the failures, the integrity test. I needed that to get where I am today. And I am blessed to be able to say, this is who I am. I mean, there is no other, somebody else behind the curtain. And I've never been one to worry about winning a popularity contest. Maybe this is just a second rung in that question, and that would be when I was in banking. I always took the position that I would rather be effective rather than popular, so long as my intention was honorable. In other words, if you were working for me, Brenda, you may not think I'm the greatest boss in the world, but you always knew I was trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And so popularity didn't matter to me. I wasn't a jerk. I wasn't, a demanding, but I wasn't always popular because I had to make tough decisions. But if I looked at the overall team and said, this is what's good for us, and I could explain that, and I don't mean from a corner office, I mean from like this, sitting in front of them, I would always take the effective over popular. And that has served me well over the years.
I definitely, I think we're a mirror image of everybody. So far you've talked about integrity and you've talked about authenticity, because that's how it says raw and real. You can't be anybody else other than yourself. And, I bet you any money, not that I'm a gambling woman at all, but you know what I mean? It's one of those idioms, isn't it? That you can tell if someone is just not being kosher, they're not being who they are. People, I just believe people can't pull the wool over my eyes anymore. Years ago, yes, naive and all of those things, but it's the inner journey, Dennis, would you agree? It's the inner journey that reveals the greatest gifts and power that we've got to share with others. Hence, you lead a life of service.
Amen. And, there is a third item I would add to that list, the question you asked me, and that is, don't lose sight of the people that are important to you. In my case, I can say my wife, but, you're starting a business, you're taking risks, you're doing all these other things, but you got to save some time for the people that are behind you. And I don't mean, give those important discussions with that person your undivided time versus what's left over at the end of the day. And that is, wow, that is such an important element of what's kept my compass where it belongs, knowing that I'm still devoting my undivided attention to my wife when we're talking versus it's been a long day at my startup, I'm tired, where's my dinner? And you're going through the motions. And that is, wow, that pays dividends over the long haul.
But you see, it's all that, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you. I don't know if it's American accent, but, the great Stephen Covey and the Jim Rohn, they're the same, they believed in the same things. And it's this on the emotional intelligence side, we should listen not to answer, but listen to understand.
Oh, wow.
And that, I've got goosebumps.
That is priceless, what you just said, priceless. And, where are we taught that, Brenda? You have to understand it, but, you're a teacher. And when I was in school in America, I didn't go to college, but wherever, I've never been taught the priceless value of just listening to Brenda, not because I want to respond. And I mean, and what it feels like to be listened to. You also know what it feels like when I'm on my phone versus listening to you.
Oh, you see it all the time. networking events, you walk in a room, you see someone, and you're engrossed in a conversation, and I like good eye contact. And of course, you don't stare, but you look and you glance and you look. But that person that you're talking to is like this. They're trying to see, who else can I see? Who's more important to you? Because that's how they make you feel. They make you feel lesser rather
Yes.
than listen to. Of course, sometimes you do need to pull yourself away, but it's the manner of the way, it's how you conduct yourself,
Oh boy.
and going back to integrity, what do people say about you when you walk out the room?
Yeah. Yeah. Very good point. That's an interesting perspective to have. Wow.
It's important that you're leaving that imprint, and that's a lot of the work that I do between publishing and leadership. Is all about, we're here to serve, to learn, to share, but most of all to leave an imprint in the lives of those who we touch, and that is legacy for me.
Yeah.
What's your legacy? So that's why story, and that's why I do these books, and that's why I bring people together. And I never wanted to be a publisher. I never wanted to be an author. So that's where our lives are now the same. I fell into being a publisher, and do you know what? Since the day I said yes to the universe, not knowing what I was doing, talk about abundance, alignment, and everything going my way, because you're aligned with who you are, and it's about service. And I've realized Stephen Covey's book, The Eighth Habit, is all about voice.
Yeah, you're right. You can distill that down to that one word.
Voice. And voice in my world equals truth. And that truth, that doesn't finish there, Dennis, that truth is infused with love.
What a powerful combination.
Because we could all go, oh, well, he's not a very good person, or she's not a very good person. They charge too much. Oh, no, they do this. They don't walk the talk. That's not my truth. That's my opinion. And there's a difference. So for me, voice, that's why voices of strength, because it's your story. It's your story. It's your truth. It's your perspective. It comes from your experience, your lessons. No one can argue with it. No one can argue with it. So therefore, all my books are called Voices for that reason.
It's funny. I talk about using a lot of quotes. I'm going to be quoting you now.
It's so voice is truth infused with love. Because people, so if I say to you, Dennis, who are you? What's your response to that? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here.
Well, I'm not going to be the guy that says, fine, how are you? Because I learned long ago that, a true friend stops to get the answer to that question. So I'm going to tell you how I am. If you ask me that right now, unrehearsed, I am.
Sorry, didn't interrupt you. Oh yeah, okay, maybe you are going to answer me. Sorry, I wasn't sure if you misheard me. I do apologize for interrupting.
Oh, that's all right. No, my answer would be very quickly. Not only am I fine, I'm happy, I'm settled, I'm blessed, and I know that. And it goes back to many things I've already talked about, but that's a great question to ask people, providing you're willing to hang around and listen to the answer.
Exactly. It's back to that listening. But the question I did ask you is, who are you?
Who am I?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, boy, that's a tough one, because I think I've kind of answered it already, but I know I'm a lucky guy. I'm very fortunate because I'm sitting here. What I do is my passion. And a lot of people say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, it's not an occupation. It's an occupation. I choose to do this. I've been choosing to do this for over a decade now. I'm blessed to be able to continue it. Part of it's driven by the fact that nothing we do has tied to any economics. We do it because we love it. And how many people can say that? So I just know.
That's blessed. That's blessed. I use that word a lot.
Yeah, I know how lucky I am, I guess, is my point. So lucky is probably a quick way to define it. And blessed, I always use the word blessed because I think that's tied into it.
Yeah, blessed is right, and I think it's this inner journey, this exploration, this journey towards, you know, the highest vibrational energies, enlightenment. Not many of us get there, but love, joy, and peace are where we go. So I have got to the point in my life now when someone asks me who I am, I say I am love and sunshine energy.
Oh, I like that a lot.
You know, and I couldn't say that for quite some time because I thought it sounded corny and like crazy. But because I'm aligned with who I am, everything I do. So this is another one of my sayings. And it's not my saying, it's not unique to me. I hear people saying it. But what I say is, and it's exactly what you've just said there, but this is how I say it. I say, I love what I do and do what I love.
Well, you couldn't have said that better, obviously. And
That's
how
it.
many people, we both know how fortunate we are to be able to say that.
Exactly. You know, and, you know, I've got 4 kids and I'm blessed with the lives that they lead. And I often say as well, if I was to die tomorrow, I would die happy with no regrets because
Very good.
I've got up 4 amazing human beings and they're bringing up their amazing human beings. So there's something that's got to be done right. And that all started with a background of humility and zero zilch. My story is I was born in a 6 foot by 6 foot hole in the wall. That was it.
I just love your perspective.
You know, it's like, so how did we get there? Dennis, you and I know, and you've written it in your chapter in Voices of Hope, and it's we work hard.
We did, and as you said so well, and I think that's an important message for everyone out there. Everybody thinks we've all got these business plans. That's not true. Of course, there's a generic business plan in your head, kind of what you want to do. But I think if I followed your traditional business plan, I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing today. I had to learn to kind of use my instincts, use my intuition, develop my wisdom from experience. And that was layered over time. I wasn't born that smart. But then you got to trust your heart and your gut and just roll that dice. It's scary. I'm going to say that one more time. But that's how you got here. And I don't want to say everything I've done has been a success story. There have been failures, but I've learned how to bounce back and get perspective and get smarter. And wow.
And that is why you are a voice of strength. Because you've got that story. You've got that wisdom. You've been on that journey. You've got the experiences, you've got the failures, you've got the successes. And we do need an element of wisdom to make us, our voices, to amplify our voices, should I say. You know?
But I think you also need to do what you're doing and I'm doing. Be willing to give it back. Be willing to share it. You know, what we're doing right now, I'm hoping somebody somewhere will benefit from this, from your book, because you don't have to do that. I don't have to do this, but we're at that legacy stage once again.
Yeah.
And if I could keep somebody from failing or help them be more successful or help, they're listening to us and say, you know, I've been thinking about it, but based on what Brenda and Dennis said, I'm going to go ahead and do it. That's, you know, you and I may never know it, but God bless them for being inspired.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We never know who's listening. I've met people I met someone in 2018 and they're now coming and writing a book with me. And they told me when they came to me, I went to a book launch that you spoke at. And from that day, my life changed. I didn't know that until she came back.
But doesn't that just say it's worth every minute when you hear those kind of things?
Yes.
So I think we have the capacity to change lives, which is why we continue to do what we do, because people question it all the time. It takes time, but we're choosing to, you know, it's investing our time versus spending our time.
I love that. I'm taking I'm loving that. That's my quote from you. It's
okay, I'll trade you then.
Time instead of spending our time. That is genius. I love that. So last word to you. What, in your words, is a voice of strength?
Oh, wow. Was your question, what in my life is a voice of strength?
What in your life, what is your philosophy on what is a voice of strength?
Oh, that's an easy one. You know, it's not just saying everything you and I have said, but it's when I hang up from this call, walking that talk, which means I'm not saying what I want Brenda to hear. I am living that life. And if I'm giving back, I am truly giving back. And if I'm preaching, as you know, what we do, we talk a lot about rediscovering humanity. I better be rediscovering it. I better be doing that. Otherwise, I think it attacks my own integrity, my own credibility. So I am probably over the top manic about making sure that I deliver on the promises I make to everybody through our mission, through our passion, through our nonprofits. And
Yeah.
and so, I mean, that's an easy one. Thank you for leaving me with an easy one.
There we go. I hope I haven't challenged you too much.
Oh, not at all.
The thing
No,
is,
it's a pleasure because you're asking some good questions that we should all think about.
the thing is, the first ever piece. Oh God, thank you. You've just given me an aha moment. First ever published piece of writing I ever did was called "All the Answers Are Within."
Wow, powerful. It's powerful.
And here we are today, 6-7 years later, and now I believe it even deeper that all the answers are within. So Dennis, thank you very much for your time, for your energy, for your contribution, because we're here to contribute to the world to make it a better place.
Really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, thank you, Dennis. You know where I am anytime. Return the favor anytime at all. So this is Brenda saying, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation today with Dennis and I. BD, I love it. Brenda Dempsey. No, it's Brenda and Dennis. And so until the next time, this is Brenda saying, be brilliant, much love, and to the pip.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, Dick.